Now let's talk about different types of inflation measurements. And one of the most commonly reported inflation measurement in the news is called Consumer Price Index, or sometimes referred to CPI. And that's basically the average increase in consumer prices in the economy. So how do you construct, or how do they create the CPI? Well, it's first of all, it's constructed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they use what they call a market basket of goods and services that a consumer usually buys. So what they do is they survey many different households, and they get an idea of what households buy on a month-to-month basis, and then they track those prices. And so the market basket of goods is simply what a typical household buys on a monthly basis. And the CPI is usually expressed in terms of what the market basket costs in a specific base period. Now, base period is kind of like a period of reference. So the base period is the time period used for comparative analysis, and it's the basis for indexing, for example, price changes. And let me give you an example of that. I'm going to show you how to create a price index. And the way you create a price index is you simply take the price level in a given period and divide it by the base period, and you multiply it by 100. Let me show you. So here we have some prices for 4 years, 1980, 81, 82, and 83. So what you have to do is you first have to select the base period, and let's select the base year. It could be a month or it could be a day, but the base year is 1980. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide all of the values by the base period. So what we're going to do is for 1980, it's going to be 6804 divided by 6804. So since 1980 is the base period is in the denominator, and that's obviously going to equal 1. And then what we're going to do for 1981, we're going to take the 1981 value, which is 6814, and divide it by the base period, which is 6804. And for 1982, it's going to be 6900 divided by 6804. And finally, 1983, 7029 divided by 6804. So you could see what we've done here is we've put the base period in the numerator. And we see that this gives us an index value. So do you see how this is 100? I said it was 1 before. All that we're doing is multiplying that by 100. So 6804 divided by 6804 is 1. But if we multiply it by 100, we get this number. So that's all we're doing for visual purposes. So the index value here in 1980 is 100. Here it's 100.15, 101.41, and finally 103.31. Now that's the index. To figure out the inflation rate, we simply take this period divided by this period and minus 1. That's what you get right here, and times 100. For this value, we take this divided by this minus 1 times 100, and that's 1.26. For this value, we take this divided by this minus 1 times 100, and we get 1.87. So this is the annual inflation rate. So the relative importance of a product in the CPI is reflected in its item weight. So when we talk about a market basket of goods, so let me see if I could draw a nice little basket. So this is a basket of goods, and here we have, say, French bread. We've got some crackers, some milk. That's a milk carton, by the way. And here we've got some grapes. We've got all kinds of stuff in this market basket of goods. Well, what we do is we have to give each item weight based upon the purchasing habits. For example, what if you spend 75% of your money on bread and only 10% on grapes? Well, what we want to do is we want to have the price change for bread have a heavier weight than the price change for grapes, because you spend more money on bread, therefore it has greater importance in terms of price changes. So what we're going to do is here, the impact of CPI of a price change for a specific good is calculated as follows. We take the percentage change in CPI, which is the inflation rate, and multiply it by the percentage change or the item weight. Let me give you an example. Here we see that the item weight for housing prices, let's say the rent that you pay, that's given a weight of 32.9% because it's estimated that roughly 33% of all income spent by a typical household is spent on housing, like rent. Roughly 17% of all your income is on transportation. So what we do is we use these weights for those items in these categories to give either greater or less importance to price changes. So let's look how the CPI has changed over the years. You could see that in the 2000s, we saw a general increase in the average inflation rate. And then we had a recession. That's a drop in overall economic activity. And it started here. So this side of the gray area, that's the start of the recession. And that was in December 2007. And it lasted 18 months. And it ended in June 2009, and you could see that's when prices started to fall and actually went into deflation. So here's 0% inflation, right? And so when this number drops here, that's deflation. Then it came out of deflation right here, and we've seen a change in it, but it no higher than 4%, and you can see it dipped a little bit, pretty low here. In around 2015, but you could see it's been creeping upwards ever since. Now, one of the reasons for these changes here and here is two of the categories in CPI are very volatile. That's food prices and energy prices. And one way to try to filter out the effects of the food and energy, because they could really cause wild swings in inflation, is to subtract out food and energy prices. And that's what we call something called core CPI. Core CPI is simply CPI less food and energy. And that's the red line right here. And you could see how it's a lot more stable than the overall number. So you could see how the CPI fell here, but core CPI was relatively stable. Then it's starting to increase here, but again, stable. That's because the reason for the price drop and the price increase on average was due to food and energy. And when you filter those effects out, you get this effect right here. Now, another way of measuring prices is don't look at consumer goods and services. What about the prices paid by producers? That's called PPI, Producer Price Index. And that's another way of trying to figure out, maybe get some lead time as to what's going to happen to inflation in the consumer sector by looking at inflation changes in producer sector. The theory goes, here's a factory. That's a factory. it's producing goods and services. And then it gets shipped, the goods and services get shipped to a store. That's a store, right? And what we see here is if the producer is paying higher prices for raw materials, for, ingredients, let's say, that's going to lead to higher prices at the store, right? So this is why people try to track producer prices to get a lead time to what may happen to consumer prices. Now another measurement, remember, if we look at GDP, GDP is really goods and services for the consumer sector, goods and services for the business sector, and we call those investment goods and services, that's why we say I, and goods and services for the government, and goods and services for foreign consumption. We call that net exports. Well, CPI measures prices only in this part of the economy. Well, the GDP deflator is a measurement in prices for all of the economy. So it's a broader measurement of inflation. And the GDP deflator usually registers a lower inflation rate than overall CPI. So unlike CPI and PPI, the GDP deflator is not limited just to a fixed basket of goods. Its value reflects both price changes and market responses to those changes. Now, what are some of the, broadly speaking, what causes inflation? Well, there are really two broad causes. The supply and demand. So, if we look at a price and quantity, we look at supply curve and we look at a demand curve. If demand increases, that's a rightward shift in the demand curve, like this. And you could see how the old price level was right here. The old quantity level was right here. If the demand curve shifts this way, we got a new equilibrium price level and a higher inflation rate. See how the price level went up? That's called demand pull inflation. So demand pull inflation, let me get this drawing out of the way here for you. It results from an excessive pressure of demand on the demand side of the economy. And one way of describing it is too much money chasing too few goods. That's what causes prices to go up. Well, another reason is called cost push inflation. And in this particular case, price, quantity, we got the supply curve and the demand curve. Now in this case, if supply drops at all price levels and it moves this way, you could see that the old equilibrium here, quantity and price, if the price level or supply curve moves this way, we got a new equilibrium level, and you notice how prices have also gone up. And we call this cost push inflation. Higher production costs could put upward pressure on product prices. So those are two broad reasons why prices would go up. So that closes our talk for inflation.